It was summer of 2016 when I first started playing Dungeons & Dragons. Neither I nor any of my friends had ever played any kind of tabletop RPG before, but just as I graduated, I became addicted to a little show called Critical Role. Matt Mercer and the cast showed me the narrative potential of the game, as well as introduced me to the rules in a fun, engaging way and showed me just what it was all about. 6 years and hundreds of hours later, D&D has been a core hobby for me and my friends, and is the basis of some of our fondest memories together. And it's because of that extensive playtime that I've come to hate many aspects of this system. Now, up front, I want to say, obviously, that 5e is great in many ways. When 5th edition released, it brought something unique and valuable. It encourages creative roleplay. The system is great at stoking the imagination, and with extra supplements like the Dungeon Master's Guide and the Monster Manual, it's really welcoming to new DMs and players. It really helps a person get into a tabletop RPG without a lot of difficulty. But there's also a heaping truckload of dumb shit. Making feats an optional part of 5e is a game design tragedy. Perk selection is a cherished part of RPG history, allowing players to create characters that truly feel unique. For those unfamiliar, a perk is a situational, active or passive ability that a player chooses at varying levels of progression. Oftentimes, they have to choose one perk over a selection of others. Being presented with this choice between multiple options allows you to carve out a distinctive identity for your character or a unique role that they fill. In 5th edition, this kind of mechanic could have come in the form of feats. Instead, the designers made them optional. Even worse, they made it so that it's costly to take them. You actually have to hinder your character to do so. The only way to get a feat, if you embrace the optional rule, and if the DM doesn't add another homebrew rule as well on top of that, is to sacrifice ability score improvements to choose a feat. Raising your character's ability score in 5e is one of the key ways that your character grows stronger. In a system that already has glacially slow leveling, where many levels can go by before anything the player really looks forward to actually comes their way. But if you decide you want your rogue to be a hunter of evil mages because it ties into their backstory and identity really well, you have to forego one of the very few ability score improvements you get just to take the Mage Slayer feat. This punishes creativity. Aside from subclass choices, every character who shares a class is mechanically identical to all of the other characters, minus the items that they might receive. And the only way to further distinguish your character by choosing feats is to willingly sacrifice their own power and potentially put your character behind the difficulty curve of the rest of your party. Really lame. D&D 5e is a specific rules system, except when it isn't, and you have to change everything constantly. How many DMs run the game rules as written? If you spend time reading any Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition forum, you will know the answer is practically zero. Fans of 5e often herald the system's open-ended flexibility as one of its greatest strengths. Don't like something? Just homebrew it. But there comes a point when so many rules need to be homebrewed that it begs the question, why are we using this system at all? It's the old philosophical question, if you keep swapping parts out of a car, how long is it before it's no longer the car you started with? Now obviously, every system is going to have a good homebrew rule or two, because every group is different. Rules you might decide on at your table may fit the kind of game you want to play, and that's normal and welcome. But it often feels 5e homebrews have to serve as large fundamental changes to the game's mechanics just to reach a baseline playability. Here are some rules in 5th edition the DMs change very often. Critically successful attacks, when you roll a natural 20, tell you that you should simply roll twice the number of dice that your weapon or spell attack would normally roll, and then add your modifier on top of it as usual. You know what sucks? When you roll 2 ones on those dice, and you end up doing 6 damage with your longsword critical. Crit rules are often homebrewed faster than you can say dead goblin. Speaking of death rules suck. When you go unconscious in D&D, you start making death saving throws. If you roll 3 successes, your character stabilizes and stops actively dying. If you roll 3 failures, you're in the dirt. But the rules state that if you are brought up with any form of healing magic whatsoever, all of your death saving throw failures go away. So if your party just packs a bunch of healing magic and clerics, the game just turns into an endless series of Consequently, many DMs change it so that players keep their death saving throw failures even once brought back to consciousness, so that there's actually a degree of pressure to not continue eating hits to the face. If you're nearing 0 HP, you should probably take a step back. Fall damage increases by 1d6 for every 10 feet your character falls, and is capped at 10d6. At most, your character can take 60 damage, and that is very unlikely, even in that case. The common argument for why this is the case for terminal velocity, the maximum speed attainable by an object as it falls through the air. The problem is that this is a fantasy game, and when a character has over 60 hit points, which you will have once you hit the halfway point of the game, you can fall 1,000 feet and live. Terminal velocity doesn't stop people from turning into paste when they fall great distances in real life, and no amount of adventuring experience should change that, even in a fantasy world. There are many other little things that 5e DMs are constantly homebrewing to make the rules feel copacetic with what players and DMs would expect to happen. The point is, if a system requires this much fine-tuning and constant adjustment to feel valid, why are we paying for the books and the website subscriptions necessary to play it? High-level play is untenable, and challenge ratings are a joke. This is a complex topic that is difficult to give a lot of concrete examples for, but anyone who's played high-level D&D 5th edition knows how off-the-wall insane things start to get. DMs in particular know how difficult it becomes to balance high-level play, because certain class features combined with the treasure trove of magic items high-level characters are likely to have makes it almost inevitable the DMs are either going to have to start secretly lowering or raising monster HP, or, in the worst case, fudging their dice rolls so they don't accidentally kill their players with overtuned encounters. A good example of this problem is the Rakshasa. It's a challenge rating 13 fiend. What makes the Rakshasa unique is that it is completely immune to all spells 5th level or lower. It is not affected by spells unless they are 6th level or higher. Okay, so it's challenge rating 13. What happens if your entire party is mages, magic users? All of them cast spells. What if that's their only real way of dealing damage? If that's the case, this thing's challenge rating might as well be 1 billion. Meanwhile, if your party is entirely composed of martial, physical characters who don't rely on spells for anything, then it's much easier than challenge rating 13. But none of these things are explained in the Rakshasa's information. As a DM, you just kind of have to know that through experience. So if you're new to the game and you look at this creature and think, that'll be a good challenge for my players, you may very well be wrong, because the system does not make it clear one way or another. It's often said because of these issues that the best Dungeons & Dragons 5e happens in the first 10 levels of the game. And that's definitely true in my experience, but I also think that's pretty disappointing. Multiclassing is another element of 5th edition that makes the player feel punished for wanting to do something creative. Let's say you're playing a 3rd level monk. You just chose your subclass or your monastic tradition, and your character is seeming more and more, narratively, like someone who is really into their religion, the worship of a particular god, and you think it would be really cool if your monk was also partially a cleric who had some spell-casting abilities in the divine realm of the arcane. So you dig open the rules in 5th edition for multiclassing, and you decide, yeah, you're gonna dip into cleric. Okay. So you reach level 4. You gain 1 level in cleric. You gain their starting cantrips, and the first couple of first level spell slots that they have access to. A couple of small class features from the cleric as well. Now, your character is level 4, but it's 3 levels of monk and 1 level of cleric. Were you looking forward to that 4th level ability score increase? You have to wait 1 more level for that now. That extra attack you get as a 5th level monk is also delayed by 1 level. In fact, everything you will ever get as a monk is now delayed by 1 level. So when your friends are getting their ability score increases and their extra attacks, you're getting some cantrips and 1st level spells. Maybe a good class feature or 2. Probably not as good as having 2 attacks. And that's just if you only take 1 level of cleric. The more levels of cleric you take, the further behind your monk is. This is the problem with D&D 5e multiclassing. Dipping into other classes siphons progress away from the initial class you chose. You can't just take a quick dalliance into other classes. You have to fully commit and lose progress on your main one. There are some undeniably useful multiclassing options. Taking a level in Barbarian will give you a Rage. Taking a level in Warlock Hexblade will let charisma-based casters use melee weapons very effectively. Outside of those exceptions, though, most multi-class pairings are just objectively worse versions compared to the main class you could have played. Not groovy. Okay, on to the last one. Ah, yes, of course. Jeremy Crawford can go f*** himself. If you're a new player, you might not know who that is. Jeremy Crawford is one of Dungeons & Dragons 5e's lead designers. And based on what I've talked about in this video, I don't think he's very good at his job. The rules of 5e are notoriously ambiguous, so people started asking Jeremy Crawford for rulings through his Twitter. Jeremy Crawford makes rulings on the spot, and never once does he own up to how poorly worded or vague the original rules are. There's never any accountability or admittance that things could have been done better. Instead, he either just doesn't acknowledge or address the fact that he has to do this so much, or he blames you for not reading it carefully enough. Unarmed strikes are melee weapon attacks, and they don't work with Divine Smite, which requires a weapon. Clarification about bonus actions. If a feature says you can do X as a bonus action if you do Y, you must do Y before you can do X. For Shield Master, that means the bonus action must come after the attack action. You decide when it happens afterward that turn. Curious why I changed my ruling on bonus actions? When there's a gray area in the rules, I lean on general rules or exceptions to determine a ruling. My original ruling relied on the general rule, but over time, the weight of the exceptions swayed me to a more logical ruling. And my personal favorite surrounds an actual debate that I had with one of my close friends and a previous DM. A few spells in D&D 5e conjure objects made of pure force. Some spells that do this include Autoluke's Resilient Sphere and Wall of Force. Both of these created objects are basically indestructible, but they have a single paragraph at the end of the spell that says that they can be destroyed by the 6th level spell, Disintegrate. So you can imagine my delight when I'm looking for my first 7th level spell ever across me playing the game for my College of Lore bard, Dorian. And I come across a spell called Force Cage. Force Cage summons a big cube of force to trap people inside of. There's no saving throw. It's indestructible to all things, and not only does it not have the paragraph that says Disintegrate doesn't work, the final paragraph specifically says Dispel Magic doesn't work either. So despite my DM thinking that Disintegrate ought to work against Force Cage due to how strong the spell is and frankly how hard it is to plan around it, it was undeniable that this force object was the exception to the rule, as there was clear rules precedent that all these previous spells clarified in these paragraphs that Disintegrate would work, but this was the one spell that did not include Disintegrate can destroy something made of magical force. Force Cage is described in its first sentence as composed of magical force. Oh good! So not only does Jeremy make a blanket statement about the Disintegrate spell that is not repeated in any official published D&D material anywhere, he then also condescends to the person who is asking the question, implying that they can't read. Here's the thing, Jeremy. Magic isn't real. None of these spells are real. This isn't 2 + 2 = 4. There are no rules unless you write them down. Disintegrate can destroy something made of magical force. What if this is special magical force, Jeremy? What if this is Force Object, Platinum Edition, and it can't be destroyed by Disintegrate? Because it didn't say it could, like all the other ones did. It's almost as if that's what a player would assume. When you forget to include a ruling in the description of a spell that was in it consistently in all the other cases. And when you and your team forget to include these clarifications or these extra rules in the things that you publish, the proper response is not to condescend to the person who asked the question, or to act as if we should simply understand these things as a given. The proper response is to be authentic and transparent about the fact that you are human and that you make mistakes, and to say something along the lines of, I apologize. We forgot to clarify that. I did intend for Disintegrate to work against Force Cage. Silly me. Yeah, so I don't run D&D 5e anymore. As I've grown old and bitter in my RPG career, I've started turning toward other systems. When you first get into D&D 5e, it can feel like it's the entire world, that you'll be playing it for the rest of your life, and many people will. And just because D&D 5e is the most popular tabletop RPG system in the world, that might make it perhaps the most approachable. It by no means makes it the best one. The most well-designed, the most well-written, and ultimately maybe the most satisfying. But that's just my crotchety old opinion. Regardless of its flaws, though, 5th edition was the game that got me into this hobby, and I can't be anything but eternally grateful for that. But as with any hobby or creative pursuit that you love as much as I love tabletop RPGs, you look at this kind of thing and you can only ask yourself, is there a way it could be even better? What do you hate about Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition? What do you hate about everything I said in this video? Do you have any warm and fuzzy experiences with our pal Jeremy? I'd love to know in the comments.